When I look at the House and I look at the Senate, what I see is a lot of alarm bells for Republicans.
It's completely legitimate for Democrats to point out that Republicans can't say 2 + 2 = 4.
Trump doesn't care about election integrity. If he had any interest in this whatsoever, then he could do one very easy thing.
Are they crazy? Yes, they're crazy. Yeah, I don't love any of this. It's Political Rehab, where PTI meets The Daily Show. This week, is Trump about to drop an election bombshell? The one question Republicans can't answer. J.D. Vance shocking moves on Rogan's show. The DSA platform revealed, and it's a doozy. And the fight over ICE is on inside the administration. Plus, our weekly look at the midterm battlefield has some big moves and big money. Let's get straight to this week's rundown. President Donald Trump is set to deliver a primetime address, ostensibly about a major bombshell about elections. He's going to say that he has evidence that the 2020 election was rigged, which we know it was not. And this is all a buildup to a case for why he needs to rig the 2026 election. This all raises the question that's unresolved as of this hour when we're recording this about whether major news media networks are going to even carry this. Matt, here are the options that are on the table. The major networks could take this address, which is primed to be a fire hose of harmful lies, and they could carry it, but then provide some context and analysis, or they could cut in if he starts to lie so blatantly they can't put up with it anymore, or they could simply not carry it at all. What do you advise them to do?
Oh, I think they carry this. If you're Fox News, you want every piece of it. If you're CNN or your major network, this gives you an opportunity to get your ratings, because this is all just about ratings for them right now.
Oh, you're saying this is what they will do, but not necessarily what they should do.
Okay. Yeah, media is a business. So they, of course, want to carry this thing because it drives eyeballs. It creates that chaos that they can continue to come back to. Now, look, election integrity and security is vital to America, but Trump doesn't care about election integrity. If he did, if he had any interest in this whatsoever, then he could do one very easy thing, and that's get the House and Senate to pass a standalone bill on voter ID. You probably get 60 votes in the Senate. That's not what Trump wants to do. Trump wants to use this as a moment to leverage more federal power, which should scare the shit out of every single conservative that's out there. We have campaigned against this for years, almost decades. MAGA will just eat up whatever garbage they tell them because they want to believe the lies, even though there is no proof to it whatsoever.
By the time people see this, they'll know the answer on whether the networks are going to cover this. I'll cover what they should do. They absolutely should not cover this. There's no obligation. They actually refused to cover a 2014 Barack Obama primetime address because they thought it was, quote, overtly political. What then is this? When you have Donald Trump, who is documented to have committed 30,573 lies during his first term, who has repeatedly lied about this debunked, insane, delusional conspiracy theory about the 2020 election, and he's using it to make 2026 not the next election, but the last election in America. There is not only no obligation for the networks to cover this, they have a moral obligation, a patriotic obligation not to cover it.
It's interesting you talk about the election because that was a subject of confirmation hearings as Jay Clayton, the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, sought confirmation as director of national intelligence. Clayton faced questions about the 2020 election, subpoenas targeting journalists, and whether he would protect the intelligence community from political pressure. Now, to me as a Republican, watching the Democrats ask these questions, it looked just like political theater. It was part of the tired, recycled playbook that every GOP candidate has had to answer since 2020. Did Joe Biden win the election? I see it as an empty gotcha to fire up the Democrat base. Matt, but I think you see this very differently.
I do see it very differently. Democrats aren't the one who keep bringing up the 2020 election. Per our earlier story, it's Donald Trump and his pliant minions who keep bringing up and litigating the 2020 election. We're not the ones who raided state election officers with the FBI and the director of national intelligence standing there. We're not the ones who keep spreading debunked lies about the election or using those lies as an excuse to interfere with the next election. We're not the ones who are simply afraid to say, not the legalistic dodge that Republicans always go to. Joe Biden was certified. I don't know what the fuck happened here, but he was certified. So I guess that's the answer I'm obligated to.
You know, I've written a lot of those lines for candidates. That's the easiest answer.
Yes.
I know.
That is the easiest dodge out there. How about the truth? He won. He was the winner. It's completely legitimate for Democrats to point out that Republicans can't say 2 + 2 = 4 because they're so afraid of angering the delusional president of the United States. This nominee, one of his talking points in his opening speech was, I will speak truth to power. Okay, speak the truth to this deranged power. The fact that Republicans can't tell that simple truth should be disqualifying.
You're right. It is easy. Joe Biden won. Joe Biden didn't win because of some magical stolen ballots. He won because Trump lost suburban women in swing states, and Joe Biden just ran a better campaign, and Trump did horribly along the way. So it's not hard to do it. So it's not some imaginary cabal out there trying to do it. But because of Trump, we can't answer basic questions. Because of what you pointed to, it creates more problems and more vulnerabilities.
Speaking of making answers harder than they need to be, let's talk about the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, going on the most popular podcast on earth, Joe Rogan's show, and putting out a fire with gasoline in a nearly 3-hour interview released Wednesday. Vance told Rogan he believes that elements inside the Israeli government are running a, quote, very discreet, extremely well-funded campaign to keep the Iran war going indefinitely, and separately said that Jeffrey Epstein, quote, clearly had connections to the highest levels of Israeli intelligence. This is making waves. Matt, you're the Republican campaign consultant here. What is J.D. Vance doing? And is he doing something for Trump or for himself?
He's making it hard for every Republican to win in November. Let me strip all this away. We like to talk about truth serum on this show. Here's the thing. The base is angry. MAGA's not leaving Trump. That's not what I'm saying. But they are angry. They are angry because they wanted information about Epstein. They want more arrests, more deportations. They hate the war in Iran. So Vance goes on Rogan because he needs to get a message to the base. He needs to turn the administration's failures into a story about betrayal, because he was the central negotiator on the Iran ceasefire. The ceasefire is now unraveling. So Vance's version is that Israeli officials, paid influencers, war hawks tried to sabotage his diplomacy. On Epstein, the administration failed. It was all Bondi. It wasn't their failure. It was somebody else. It was the deep state that's out there. This is trying to shore up that base. It's a 1-2 punch with what Trump is going to talk about in his primetime address.
I think Vance's problem here was an excess of truth-telling. It's been well documented that Benjamin Netanyahu did indeed head fake Donald Trump into starting the Iran war. That's a pretty well documented thing. Of course, it does fall into anti-Semitic, blame-shifting, nefarious sections of Israel. It begins to echo DSA. Frankly, on the Epstein side, I covered this with the journalist Greg Oliar on the live stream. It is actually pretty well documented that Jeffrey Epstein had connections to all kinds of worldwide intelligence agencies, including Israel's. So that's not particularly shocking. Again, this seems like it's veering on the edge of anti-Semitic conspiracy theorism. Speaking of the DSA, oh boy. All right, let's talk about the DSA.
Yeah, let's talk about the DSA.
Let's talk about the DSA. You would love nothing better. You know why? Because you're a Republican. That's something that I discovered this week. Here's how I found this out, okay? You wanted to talk about the fact that the DSA revealed its new platform. Apparently, the Democratic Socialists, even though they're nominally part of the Democratic Party, need to have their own platform. What does it call for? Abolishing the Senate, abolishing the Electoral College, replacing the president and Supreme Court with an executive and judiciary subordinate to Congress, defunding the Department of War, and, quote, this is a mouthful, abolish the carceral forces of the capitalist state. Da, comrade. Look, the reason this was revealed to me as a talking point that you would love to get into is
Yeah.
that I tried to do a little bit of background research to verify what was in this agenda for myself. And my Google search showed that the only media outlets covering this are Fox News, the Washington Examiner, and even further right media sources. They love to talk about these nut jobs. So I guess let's go ahead and do it. Matt, you guys are thrilled. Like, this is a right-wing dream. You're really
This
enjoying
is
yourself.
the biggest thing, best thing that has happened this week. I can't get enough of this. This
gosh.
wackadoodle stuff is
Oh.
taking over your party. I admit, look, it's all on Fox News. They've been loving the socialist conversation since the NYC special election. Your socialists keep winning. You have a real civil war in your party that's happening. And this, my friend, is the greatest thing that's going to happen to Republicans right now.
All right. Let me just push back on a couple of minor points here. I don't disagree with your last point. One, I will say that not everything in their platform is totally crazy. I'm not sure that Americans are that wedded to the Electoral College. And I think a majority of Americans would be fine if we elected the president by popular vote. This is not really a civil war going on here. There's not a kind of a both sidesism to this. Yes, there are extremes in both parties. However, the MAGA Republican extreme is not only in the driver's seat in your party, they're in the passenger seat, they're in the back seat, they're in the trunk. And meanwhile, hapless anti-Trump Republicans like you are strapped to the roof like Mitt Romney's dog, holding on for dear life. Meanwhile, over on the Democratic side, the number of registered Democratic socialists is about 100,000 against the number of Americans who are Democratic or lean Democratic, which is about 120 million. This is a vanishingly small sliver of the Democratic Party. Are they crazy? Yes, they're crazy. They're crazy, but there are very few of them. They are not steering the car by any means. There will be at most 6 DSA members of the House after this upcoming election, and perhaps a maximum of 2 senators. There's still time to go on this, but yeah, I don't love any of this.
We're going to get deeper into this because this is part of our battlefield conversation, but it is something that is visible. But I think you and I have the same problem, the extremes of our party. And you're right. As a Republican, this party feels so disconnected. Yours is such a small minority of it. Now, I've seen this story before as it developed in 2016. So the question is going to be, how much of it can you stop before it completely infects your entire party?
Speaking of stopping things before it infects the entire party, we've got another civil war going on inside the Trump administration because, tragically, and we don't want to make light of the underlying issue one bit, there were 2 more ICE vehicle stops that resulted in fatal shootings over the past week. And the underlying cases we're not going to delve into here, but they're tragic, they're horrifying, and they were committed once again by an overarmed paramilitary with very little training that is seemingly murdering people in broad daylight. And so this led to a temporary moratorium on vehicle stops, which Trump promptly overrode by Wednesday. So, Matt, polling shows that this is an issue where the Trump administration's actions and ICE debacles have led to a major erosion of political strength on immigration enforcement. What is going on inside your party on this?
Trump is caught between 2 competing pressures in there. When it was announced ICE was going to stop pulling over vehicles, the base went ballistic. They accused the DHS secretary of being a rhino. And he was just, after talking to Senator Collins, he decided that was the direction. The problem is the base wants more arrest and no retreat. But the tactics that are required to hit aggressive deportation targets are producing deaths, disputed government accounts, and backlash in competitive Senate races. And this administration has already gone through this cycle. Now, it's pulling the Democrats into the abolish ICE, and Republicans hope that'll be enough, but it's not. It's really going to be a problem for Susan Collins.
Let's just talk quickly about that. I know we're going to cover it more in the battlefield, but polling says that about 2/3 of Americans say ICE has gone too far. That's up 11 points in a year. ICE approval overall is around 33-34%. One of these fatal shootings was in Maine. How big a problem is this for Susan Collins?
It puts her in a situation where it could be the single thing that makes her lose. Despite what Susan Collins does, despite what she has to say, she still has an R next to her name. The sins of Trump are going to fall squarely on her when it comes down to swing voters. She needs those swing voters. She needs those people that look at her and say she's an independent minded person. But because of Trump, that R makes her toxic. She's never going to come out as anti-ICE. It puts her in a lose-lose situation, and it might be the issue that costs her seat.
Speaking of the Senate battlefield, let's broaden it out and look at the entire map as we do this week's edition of The Battlefield.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is The Battlefield.
Matt, we usually organize this around 3 things that we're each paying attention to over the past week. Give me your first.
First one we just touched on. The Democrat Socialists just handed the Republicans some great attack ads. I realize that they're a small minority of what Democrats are, but the things they are saying are so radical that in those tight races, they're going to try to nationalize those issues. We're going to run ads talking about defunding ICE, and we're going to put them right up against problems with immigrants who have killed other Americans or other crimes they've committed. And it's going to make it a tight squeeze in those races. And the problem is Democrat socialists keep winning enough races that they're not just some fringe group. They have a big enough voice that it's going to be important.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that it really takes only one, right? You only need one poster child in order to have something to run on. And so you'd rather not run against Sherrod Brown in Ohio. You'd rather run against Daria Lisa Chevalier or Abdul Al-Sayed. And so if you're really running against Sherrod Brown, you're still going to run an ad about some recognizable nutty DSA figure. Now, do Democrats have an opening to do the same thing this past week? The counting finished in Colorado, and Victor Marx is going to be the Republican nominee for Colorado governor. He is a guy who says he killed a man when he was 7 and he can exorcise demons from people. Do Democrats have the same opening here?
They don't. They'll use it, but the reality is socialist carries a different meaning. This guy who is absolutely crazy, although we probably do need to exercise some people in the Senate.
Can you imagine if he was like over Trump? The power of Christ compels you. Out, foul demon, out.
Oh, that would be entertaining. And the media, the problem Democrats have is socialist carries a weight and a meaning and a defined conversation. And with DSA putting out their platform and winning enough seats, it becomes a conversation where we start to say, that's what you get with Democrats. It's the socialists around every corner, under every bed. And that creates a problem in some of the tough races.
Great. Running against socialists under every rock, around every corner. Donald Trump, make America 1954 again. All right, what's your second one?
Second one is South Carolina. Now, we talked about it. We had the special podcast on Sunday where we talked about what this all means with the death of Lindsey Graham, but it has set up a feeding frenzy in South Carolina right now. Now, the Republican filing window doesn't open until noon on July 21st and closes on noon on July 28th. The GOP special primaries August 11th with an August 25 runoff. Now, the Democrat candidate's strong. When she was running against Lindsey Graham, she had 0 chance of winning that race. Now, this primary could get ugly. I think there are right now about 8 candidates that are sitting in there who want to run for this seat. Russell Fry has the support inside Trump's orbit, while Nancy Mace is viewed as unacceptable by parts of the Trump operation. I have said it before, if Nancy Mace becomes the Republican nominee, it makes this Senate race highly competitive.
All right, let's do your third one.
Third one, fundraising reports come out. Now, only political geeks and reporters love this time of year, but it tells us a ton of information. And right now, when you look at some of the big Senate races, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas, the Democrats have all raised significantly more money In Georgia, the Democrat raised 14 million compared to the Republicans 570,000. In North Carolina, Cooper raised 8.1 to Watley's 1.8. In Ohio, Brown has 12.5 to the Republicans 4.1. And in Texas, this just scares the hell out of me. Tallarico raised 26 million compared to Paxton's 1.6 million. And in a lot of these, the Democrats are just dwarfing Republicans. We talked a couple weeks ago about how the Supreme Court allows parties to coordinate better. This is why we wanted it, because we're getting our butt kicked out there.
We've covered the fact that it's not necessarily the raw dollars, because Republicans are ahead in terms of their party dollars, their party committee dollars. Democrats are seemingly ahead in a lot of key races when it comes to their candidate dollars. Now, under the Supreme Court ruling, because both candidates and parties get the same lowest available ad rates on television, there's an equivalence there. So it's not the total dollars. You're watching this because it's really a proxy for enthusiasm, engagement, and momentum.
In Texas alone, when you look at Tallarico and how much money he's raised compared to Paxton, that should send alarm bells across the country that Texas is more in play than we think it is. But it's also just not in the Senate. You can look at some of the House races that Democrats are targeting, like Arizona 6, Iowa 1, PA 7 and 10, Virginia 2, where the Democrats are having great fundraising totals. So when I look at the House and I look at the Senate, what I see is a lot of alarm bells for Republicans. If we want to survive what I think is going to be a blue wave, we have to win in those kind of districts. And it doesn't look like we're going to right now.
All right. Do you want to see how it all adds up?
Yeah, let's see what it looks like on the scoreboard.
So this week, the structural indicators that we always look at, presidential approval and economic sentiment and the generic ballot, were mostly fairly even. I do want to note the fact that, as we talked about last week, Donald Trump's net approval among independents continues its drip, drip, drip slide downward. And that's incredibly significant when you talk about swing voters and also enthusiasm. When you look at the race by race ratings, again, pretty stable in the House and the Senate and in prediction markets. But there was a major ratings change from the race analyst Charlie Cook when it came to governor's races this week. And two of them are especially significant, Ohio and Arizona, both moving into toss-up or lean Democratic territory. These are significant states, the 7th largest and 14th largest states by population in the US, respectively. And it shows some real momentum for Democrats when it comes to these ultra powerful and ultra important races. There is one number, though, that I want to pick out, and I'm going to go back to the earlier graphic here and take a look at the number that caught my eye. Pew Research released this week its polling showing how voters identify themselves in terms of their party affiliation. Are they willing to say to a pollster, I'm a Democrat, or I lean toward the Democrats, versus Republican, or lean toward the Republicans? What we saw this week was a gap opening up of about 4 percentage points in Democrats' favor. That's interesting because the way people identify with parties isn't fixed. Sure, there's a base for each party that is pretty fixed, people who are ride or die for their party. But a lot of voters float above that and they shift. Their perception of themselves changes with their feeling about the political climate. And we found that this number, how people identify themselves in terms of their party, is very predictive of their political behavior, how they're going to ultimately vote. And so now we're seeing a party affiliation environment that's a lot more like 2020. The other thing that's underneath this number is that party affiliation among voters without a college education has really rebounded in Democrats' direction. Just a year ago, Republicans had a 10-point advantage among voters who had never gone to college. Now it's only a 2-point advantage. In 2020, Democrats had a 2-point advantage. So again, in this key segment of voters, we're seeing a rebound in Democrats' favor and an environment that's starting to look a lot more like 2020 when they had a very strong election.
I can confirm that is huge from Republicans. Those are those politically homeless. Those are swing voters. You've gone through all this stuff, so not everybody has to. What's your bottom line on all this?
My verdict for the week is it's a very slight win for Democrats. I want to acknowledge that there are some things that have moved in Republicans' favor. Look, inflation coming down a little bit, that's a good thing. It still means prices are rising, but if they're not rising as fast and if wages are beginning to catch up, voters could start to feel a little bit better. Those ratings changes among governors, that's an important indicator. If Democrats can win the governor's race in Ohio and Arizona. In Arizona, Governor Hobbs has vetoed a record number of bills from the right-wing Republican legislature. It just goes to show how much that affects the balance of power in America. And most Americans' everyday lives are just as affected by what's happening in their states as by what's happening at the federal level. I want to keep watching what we continue to learn as these FEC reports come in. And of course, I want to see what happens with Trump's speech tonight and just how far he'll go. But to me, this week was a very slight lean toward the Democrats. You?
I think you're right. I think that's why we're seeing all the activity right now in the House and the Senate. We're trying to get a budget through. They're rushing to find something to bring home to their voters for August recess. They are running out of time. I think I saw a number, something like 27 legislative days left before the election. So they don't have a lot to get done. And I do think as the clock ticks, it makes it more and more difficult for Republicans. Looking at those fundraising numbers I mentioned, we're in trouble.
No one really wants to live inside that kind of a sausage making factory. So let's step outside it and get to this week's Dose of Hope.
Matt, have you ever watched late night TV, saw one of those eugenics commercials and think, you know who really needs this? The United States military. Apparently Pete Hegseth thinks we do.
Ensuring you have the right testosterone levels to operate at your absolute best. Because it's well-established science that as we age, testosterone levels often naturally drop. Under the supervision of our world-class medical professionals, warfighters age 30 and older are going to be tested annually as part of their periodic health assessment.
That's
America's
right.
military can't get hard anymore.
That's right. That's right. The Pentagon will now screen every service member over 30 for low testosterone to keep America's fighting force at what Hegseth later calls the leading edge of lethality. So we've officially combined Captain America with a Frank Thomas commercial. Are you over 30? Feeling tired? Losing strength? Having trouble maintaining that battlefield dominance? Ask your commanding officer if military-grade testosterone is right for you. The Pentagon is even calling itself the High T Department of War. Hegseth is building super soldiers with annual blood work and the kind of medical advice you usually see between reruns of Law and Order. America's enemies be warned, our troops are getting their edge back. And you know what? She'll like it too.
Boy, this is a case of political erectness run amok. This week, the House actually voted to lock in daylight savings time permanently, ending the twice yearly clock change. Now, it's not sure what's going to happen in the Senate, but it's a step forward. Daylight savings time was Benjamin Franklin's original idea. As an American envoy in Paris, he calculated that the French economy could save the modern day equivalent of $200 million by using sunshine instead of candles. And everything that I just said is false. That's not true at all. It's a myth. The real story is that daylight savings time was created for farmers in order to give them more daylight hours to work in the fields. Guess what? That's also a myth. Not true at all. And actually backwards, farmers hated it and cut into their early morning hours, disrupted milking schedules, and they lobbied Congress to repeal it. The point is that we don't even know why we do this exercise anymore. And the original reasons that we did it don't make any sense. Here's the real story, and I'm not capping this time. Daylight saving time was originally implemented in 1918 to help conserve fuel and power during World War I. It was then repealed after the war ended in 1919. It was enacted again in 1942 during World War II. Then it was nationally repealed as a standard in 1945. But then it was reenacted as a national standard in 1966 because so many states and localities were kind of doing their own thing that everyone was confused. Lawmakers figured, hey, some kind of a standard is better than no standard at all. And it turns out that's not even really true either, because modern studies show it doesn't actually save energy. Longer summer evenings mean people drive more and they run air conditioning more, which offsets whatever savings you get from not turning on the lights. Doctors and sleep researchers warned that it's dangerous. Losing an hour of sleep in spring disrupts our circadian rhythms, and that's linked to temporary spikes in traffic accidents, workplace injuries, and heart attacks. So, why am I hopeful? It's that we took a step forward this week. And if we can start to solve 100-year-old problems, it raises the prospect that we might eventually get to 50-year-old problems and maybe even modern problems someday. And until then, we can at least stop messing around with our clocks and stop having darkness fall at 4:30 in the freaking afternoon. And on that, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.